Have you ever felt the cold shock of injustice in the most unexpected place 30,000 feet above the ground? Picture this Dr. Maya Carter, a world-renowned cardiologist, sipping water in the hushed luxury of first class when two entitled strangers decide her only worth is as a punchline. What happens when a cruel act of racism shatters that fragile sanctuary and triggers a billionaire's wrath? How far will James Carter go to protect the woman he loves, and at what cost to everyone caught in the fallout? In this gripping tale of power, privilege, and the search for true justice, you'll meet a flight attendant whose life is upended, a crew silenced by fear, and a couple forced to reckon with the unintended victims of their own fury. Can justice remain precise when wielded by unchecked wealth? And what does it truly mean to restore dignity once it's been stripped away? If you're ready to explore the aftershocks of an act meant to be punishment, but that became a catalyst for transformation, stay with us. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss a moment of this story's next chapter. The hum of the engines was a low, comforting pulse beneath the hush of the cabin. A gentle whoosh of air from the overhead vents mingled with the subtle mechanical rhythm that told every passenger they were 38,000 feet above the earth. The clink of crystal glasses and the soft murmur of distant conversation created an atmosphere at once luxurious and impersonal. This was first class on Flight 8117 from New York to Los Angeles, a temporary refuge for those who sought comfort in anonymity and distance from the world below. Dr. Maya Carter slid into seat 1A, a cocoon of cream-colored leather and polished walnut veneer. The pod around her felt private yet exposed, like a gallery for quiet reflection. She unbuckled her seatbelt and leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment. In her daily life as a cardiologist, she was witness to life's fragility, mending broken hearts with steady hands and precise judgment. Here in the air, she could let the hum of the cabin wash away the weight of her responsibilities. She placed her tablet on the folding table, carefully opening a medical journal saved for moments like this, moments when the real world could wait for a few hours. She tucked a strand of tightly coiled hair behind her ear and adjusted her noise-canceling headphones. The world on board was designed for ease and indulgence. Plush blankets and noise-canceling earbuds were standard. Gourmet menus hovered temptingly in her lap. Yet Maya preferred simplicity. A single glass of still water and the muted glow of her tablet screen offered all the comfort she needed. She liked the way the soft light illuminated her notes, making each word crisp and clear. But luxury is a fragile illusion. It depends on the courtesy of strangers and the competence of a team. Maya had always navigated her career on the same principles she applied to surgery and diagnosis: precision, empathy, restraint. She prided herself on remaining calm under pressure. Even in the face of chaos, her mind could map solutions as deftly as it traced an EKG waveform. That composure was her sanctuary. It was the quiet center of every storm. Across the aisle, seats 1D and 1F looked identical, but they harbored a different energy. Two young men lounged in their pods, draped in the casual armor of designer sweats and limited-edition sneakers. Their chatter was a bass line in the cabin soundtrack, a low thrum of entitlement punctuated by harsh laughter. Tyler Monroe and Grant Weiss. Names Maya did not yet know, but their presence spilled across the aisle like ink on white paper. Their voices carried, filtered through the sterile hush of first class, slipping into every quiet corner. Maya closed her eyes again, willing herself to focus on the journal article, but the words blurred. Her fingers traced a passage about advancements in stem cell therapy. Yet her mind wandered. She felt an aura of intrusion, as if their energy had filled her private pod. She pried off one ear cup of her headphones and caught a fragment of their conversation. A phrase, affirmative action, spoken as an insult, a jab at people like her, people who had fought for a seat in rooms that were never built for them. Her fingers froze on the page. She resituated her headphones, sealing out the world once more, but the words clung to her thoughts. She had dedicated her life to saving hearts. Yet there were times when her own heart felt bruised by another kind of assault, the trivial cruelty of ignorance, the casual cruelty of someone who believed their privilege was a shield against accountability. She inhaled slowly, exhaled. Let the cabin's low frequency lull her into rationality. She glanced out the window. The sky was an endless blue canvas. Below, clouds rolled like silent mountains. The world was beautiful and indifferent. In this suspended space, her identity was at once hidden and glaringly obvious. She was a black woman in a cabin full of passengers paying for comfort and service. She was Dr. Maya Carter, a healer accustomed to respect and deference, yet she knew too well how quickly that respect could evaporate. She tapped her pen against the edge of the journal. Then she set it aside. A fresh glass of water arrived at her side, a silent offering from Brenda Sullivan, the lead flight attendant. Brenda moved through the cabin with poised efficiency. Her platinum hair and crisp uniform marked her experience. Maya offered a brief nod of thanks, pulling her attention back to the moment. This was the ritual of service, a momentary exchange that maintained the illusion of mutual respect. But rituals can break without warning. A flight that begins with polite nods and careful smiles can shatter in an instant. Maya sensed the tension building like static before a storm. She opened her tablet's notes app, drafting a reminder to herself. Always remain curious. Always observe before drawing conclusions. She took a sip of water. Its cold clarity steadied her. She remembered another plane ride years ago, a smaller regional jet bound for a medical conference in Boston. She'd been the only person of color on board. A woman in the row behind her had asked loudly if she was the lead doctor or just a nurse. Maya had held her tongue, letting the air of ignorance dissipate into the recirculation vents. She had learned then that silence could be a shield, but shields sometimes crack. The flight attendant's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing that drinks would be served shortly. Maya tapped her screen, bringing up the article she had paused. Her eyes scanned the paragraphs on cellular regeneration, the terminology familiar and precise. She sank into the research. For a few blessed minutes, the cabin's energy receded again. Her heartbeat slowed. Her breath found its calm. Beyond her window, the clouds thickened into a cotton sea. The engine's hum vibrated through the fuselage. Somewhere toward the front, the two men resumed their laughter. A surge of annoyance flickered in Maya's chest. She reminded herself, "You are in control. You decide how deep their words cut. You choose when to engage." She settled deeper into her seat, wrapping the soft blanket around her shoulders. She closed her eyes. She listened to the quiet hum, the distant murmur, the clink of glasses being set down on folding trays. She allowed herself this moment of refuge in the air, suspended between departure and arrival. She was a traveler, a healer, a woman of quiet strength. In a few hours, she would land in Los Angeles and return to her life of rhythms and urgencies. But, for now, this cabin was her space. She would guard it. She would reclaim it. And if the fragile peace was threatened, she had learned to stand firm with the same calm authority she brought to every patient's bedside. Who knew that sanctuary could feel so vulnerable at 30,000 feet? The cabin lights brightened slightly as the flight attendants began their beverage service. Maya Carter kept her eyes fixed on the screen of her tablet, reading about the latest trial in cardiac regeneration. She felt the familiar tickle of focus settle in. Yet, even as she read, her mind could not escape the low rumble of laughter just across the aisle. Tyler Monroe and Grant Wass were inseparable in both appearance and attitude. They leaned back in seats 1D and 1F as though they owned the entire row. Designer sweatshirts draped over their shoulders. Sneakers with neon accents peeked from beneath their legs. Each wrist bore a watch whose price tag could fund a small hospital shift. Their voices were loud enough to puncture any sense of private space, and they wielded that noise like a weapon. Maya adjusted her noise-canceling headphones but left one cup open to catch snippets of conversation. She was curious rather than annoyed. Understanding the motive behind cruelty was part of her nature as a physician. She wanted to know what made people like them feel entitled to invade the sanctuary of someone like her. Grant lifted his glass of orange juice just enough to catch the overhead light. He tilted his head toward Tyler and whispered, though his tone was still loud enough to carry, "I cannot believe they let just anybody sit up here." His gaze swept the cabin, though he did not look directly at Maya. Tyler snorted and added, "Yeah, man, it is like affirmative action at 30,000 feet. The words landed in Maya's consciousness like ice cubes against her temple. A fresh wave of anger rippled through her. She closed her eyes for a moment, let the sound wash through, then fade. She focused on her breathing. Inhale, calm. Exhale, tension. She reminded herself that her identity was her own, that even at her most vulnerable she carried authority within her skin. Yet authority can feel hollow if it is not recognized by others. A flight attendant glided by with a tray of sparkling water. Brenda Sullivan moved with seasoned grace, offering polite smiles, though she avoided eye contact with the two men. Maya thanked her as the glass was placed on the table. The cool water was reassuring. She brought it to her lips and sipped, letting the crisp liquid remind her of certainties. She was Dr. Maya Carter. She had earned every achievement through determination and skill. No one could diminish her worth without consequence. But consequence required action, and action sometimes required restraint. A lesson Maya had learned from years in the operating room. She knew the difference between precise intervention and reckless force. She weighed the moment before deciding whether to engage or to let it pass. Sometimes the best response was measured silence. Yet the men kept at it. Their barbs spread like ink on parchment. "Have you seen that guy over there with the tie-dye shirt? That is some charity gig, right? There is always one weirdo in first class." Tyler lifted his water and knocked gently against Grant's glass. Clink. A mocking cheers to privilege. Their laughter grew bolder. Other passengers shifted in their seats. Some averted their gazes. Others exchanged uncomfortable glances. No one spoke up. They seemed chained by etiquette. First class was meant to be a cocoon of mutual respect, but respect must be earned and maintained. This cabin was cracking under the weight of their arrogance. Maya removed her headphones completely and set them aside. She opened her eyes, scanning the cabin. Each face was absorbed in personal devices or drifting in the neutral calm of flight. No one approached, no one offered support. First class felt hollow without collective decency. She considered calling the flight attendant, but would her complaint matter? She remembered Brenda Sullivan's practiced neutrality. She had seen one side of the story and chosen de-escalation over confrontation. That hesitance was understandable in a crew taught to prevent scenes. Yet inaction can become complicity. Maya tapped a finger on the glass of water. She let her hand rest there, feeling the smooth surface, the condensation beating under her skin. She breathed in the cabin air deeply and exhaled slowly. She had choices. She could swallow her pride and retreat further into privacy, or she could assert her right to dignity. Both options demanded courage in their own way. As the men settled back, Grant wiped a smirk from his mouth and leaned toward Tyler. His voice dropped to a murmur but trailed loudly enough to reach Maya's ears. "Bro, trust me, no one up here gives a damn about you unless you are some trust fund kid." The words drove a stake into her resolve. No one cared. Except they could care. She could care. She had spent her entire life caring about the vulnerable and the wounded. She was not powerless just because she was the only black woman in the cabin. She pressed her lips together and rose from her seat. A small hush spread through the cabin as she stood. The leather creaked under her feet. Her posture was straight and unhurried. Her voice, when she spoke, would have to be calm but firm. Her gaze would need to pierce through their facade of superiority. She paused an instinctual beat of silence for gravity to settle. Then she addressed Brenda, who glanced at her with a practiced smile. "Excuse me, Brenda." Maya kept her tone measured, not accusing, but requesting. "I would like to make a formal note of the comments made by the gentlemen in 1D and 1F, and I would like their names and your full name for the report." The cabin's atmosphere thickened. Even Tyler and Grant stopped talking. Their heads turned toward her in synchronized surprise. Brenda's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she masked it again. "You can go ahead," Maya continued. "I have heard them clearly. They are Mr. Monroe and Mr. Weiss, Brenda. If you could note that and forward it to your supervisor, I expect an official report when the flight lands." Her words were concise. They carried the weight of someone accustomed to advocacy. The cabin seemed to lean in, holding its breath. Tyler's lips curled with amusement and a silent challenge. "You serious?" he whispered to Grant. "She thinks she can just boss us around on a plane." Grant shrugged, his arrogance back in full swing, but Maya held her ground. She had no intention of apologizing for reclaiming her peace. Brenda swallowed hard. She shifted her weight and cleared her throat. "I will make the note. Dr. Carter, please have a seat, and we will take care of this." Maya inclined her head and returned to her seat. Each movement was deliberate. She buckled her seatbelt with care and reached for her journal. She underlined a passage under her pen. Empathy with precision. Power with restraint. She closed her journal and set it aside. She picked up her water and took a slow sip. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was calm. But inside she felt a spark of anticipation. She had staked her claim on decency. The ripples of her action would spread. Now, her sanctuary felt more like a battleground, the calm before an even greater storm. Maya Carter sat in her seat, the cabin's soft lighting haloing her profile as though spotlighting a stage. The low murmur of conversation resumed around her, but it felt distant now, a soundtrack to her thoughts rather than a distraction. She stared at the seat back in front of her. the pristine leather unmarked and flawless. It was a reminder of the boundary between courtesy and hostility, and how swiftly that boundary could be crossed. Her heartbeat had steadied after her request to Brenda, but beneath her calm exterior something churned. A memory surfaced, unbidden, of a hospital board meeting years ago when she had been the only woman of color presenting research. A senior doctor had interrupted her mid-sentence to question her credentials. In that moment, she had felt the invisible line of prejudice cut across the room, dividing her from her peers. She had taken a breath, refocused on her data, and finished her presentation with measured precision. She had earned her respect that day, but the sting remained. On the plane, she felt the same divide. She was recognized here by title and privilege, yet dismissed by two young men who felt no obligation to see her as human. She settled into her seat, letting her shoulders drop as though releasing weights she had carried without knowing. She reached for her journal and thumbed to a blank page, ready to map her next steps. She wrote down words that pulsed through her mind: empathy, precision, restraint, accountability. Then she underlined each in sharp strokes. Empathy for the flight attendants who were caught between their duty and the discomfort of the cabin. Precision in every action she took to ensure fairness. Restraint in resisting the urge for immediate retribution. Accountability for those whose words and deeds had violated the unwritten code of first class. There was a soft chime from the seatback console. The captain's voice filtered through the cabin speakers, calm and reassuring. They expected light turbulence ahead. Please remain seated with seat belts fastened. Maya glanced at her belt and felt the clip settle snugly across her hips. Her eyes flicked to the windows where the sky had darkened to a deep cobalt. Intermittent flashes of lightning far below hinted at storms brewing above the clouds. A slight shudder moved through the aircraft as they passed into the weather cell. The mood in the cabin shifted. The subdued tension caused by Tyler and Grant gave way to genuine unease. Passengers allowed their masks of composure to slip. Maya noticed one older man glance at the ceiling panels as though expecting them to crack open and let in rain. The low roar of the engines seemed louder now as they fought the air currents. The airline staff moved through the cabin with calm professionalism, but Maya caught the strain in their shoulders. She wondered about Brenda Sullivan and the crew's internal conversation. Would they question the decision not to remove the guys earlier? Would they wonder if they had chosen the cheapest path to avoid drama? She closed her eyes for a moment and felt the gentle rocking of the plane beneath her sense of cage. The metal walls and narrow aisle were a reminder that escape was impossible until they landed. She pictured the invisible line again that divided safety from danger, civility from abuse. The plane was a microcosm of society, a confined space where decency had to be enforced, not assumed. She opened her eyes and scanned the cabin. The two men had returned to their seats, but their smirks remained intact, an emblem of dismissive power. Their designer clothes and expensive accessories broadcast their status like armor. Yet armor could be pierced if one knew where to strike. Maya's reflection shimmered in the dark window pane. She saw her own eyes there, fierce and unbowed. The face of a woman who had navigated hospital corridors and operating rooms with authority. She also saw the vulnerability that remained when the world reduced her to a stereotype. She inhaled slowly, letting the cool, recycled air fill her lungs, and exhaled just as slowly. She would hold her ground. The captain's voice returned, advising that turbulence would be brief and they could serve refreshments once they reached smoother air. A moment of relief rippled through the cabin. Guests closed tray tables and redistributed reading material. The attendant trolley clicked down the aisle once more, this time carrying small plates of fruit and cheese. Maya watched Brenda carefully, smile, polite, glance away, repeat. She understood the balancing act the crew performed between service and safety. Maya reached into her bag and withdrew a photograph tucked inside a journal page. A snapshot from last summer, her and her niece at a park, the golden light of evening casting a glow over both their faces. She pressed it to her heart for a moment before placing it on the seat-back table. She traced the edges with her fingertip. That picture reminded her why she fought for dignity and respect beyond the four walls of her clinic, why she refused to allow someone to diminish her in the sky or on the ground. She moved to take a sip of water, but paused, letting the moment stretch. She thought about passage of time, about how moments of cruelty could ripple outward and shape narratives, but she also thought about moments of kindness and bravery that could spark change. She wondered which narrative would follow this flight. Would the coffee spill and the incident be all anyone remembered? Or would they recall the stand she took, the demand for accountability at 30,000 feet? There was a lull in the turbulence as the plane passed through the center of the storm. Maya allowed herself a quiet smile. She appreciated the irony that, in a moment of greatest instability, she felt most clear. A sense of purpose crystallized. She would not allow herself to become invisible, or to stand by while civility was stolen from her or others. She would act with intention and clarity. She returned her gaze to the dark window. As flickers of lightning traced distant clouds, she began drafting a mental outline of what would come next. She knew James Carter would arrive with all the force of his resources, but she also knew she needed to guide that power with restraint. She needed to ensure justice without collateral harm. She imagined telling him how to channel his fury into structured support for any crew members harmed by his actions. She would stand between raw power and vulnerable lives, shaping the aftermath with empathy and precision. A gentle ding signaled the end of turbulence. The cabin lights returned to normal, and a collective sigh echoed through the space. As people reached for reading materials and adjusted their seats, Maya touched the photograph and tucked it back into her journal. She closed the journal and took a calming breath. In that moment, she sensed the invisible line had shifted. It was no longer just between strangers in first class. It was within herself, a boundary between impulse and intention, between rage and compassion. She was prepared to cross into new territory, the territory of measured action powered by empathy. And the flight was far from over. The cabin had settled into a strained calm after the turbulence, a fragile truce between passengers and crew. Maya Carter reclined in her seat, her journal open on the tray table, her pen resting lightly against the paper. She had just sketched a mental map of the next steps she would take once the flight landed. Then, without warning, the plane shuddered again. This time the movement was subtle, but enough to send a ripple through the cabin. A tray rattled, a napkin fluttered to the floor, and in that instant, Grant Weiss lost his balance. Maya looked up as Grant clutched at the armrest of his seat in 1F. His designer sweatshirt stretched across his torso as he braced himself. He took one step forward in the aisle, and the cup in his hand pitched outward. The clear, plastic vessel with its logo caught the cabin light as it arced through the air. Time slowed. Maya watched the arc of liquid tracing a path between rows 1 and 2. The ice cubes separated, floating momentarily as if weightless. A single cube spun end over end in midair. Maya's heart hammered in her chest. In one motion, she braced for impact. The glassine droplets of Diet Coke shimmered like shards of glass. Then the cup crashed against her shoulder. The cold hit her like a shock wave. The liquid soaked into her cashmere top and rolled down the front of her blouse. The ice cubes struck her tablet, sending it skidding off the tray table and clattering to the floor. The journal beneath her pen fluttered shut as soda seeped into the binding. For a heartbeat, there was silence. The hum of engines became distant. The only sound was the drip, drip, drip of liquid sliding down to the carpet. Maya sat frozen, her skin prickling with cold and humiliation. Her cheek was sticky. Her hair hung damp in front of one eye. A piece of ice had lodged against her collarbone, cold against her warm skin. Her breath caught in her throat as the realization of what had just happened washed over her. Grant Weiss broke the silence with a braying laugh. The sound was a jagged crack in the hush. He slapped his thigh. He winked at Tyler Monroe, who was doubled over, cackling in gleeful amusement. Tyler leaned forward in 1D and shouted through the cabin, "You should have seen it, man. She is soaked." That was epic. Maya's vision blurred for a moment as anger ignited behind her eyes. The cold faded into nothing compared to the burning heat of outrage. She exhaled slowly to steady herself. She would not shriek. She would not cry. She would respond with calm authority. Meanwhile, the cabin around them reacted. A woman in row 3 gasped and looked away. A man in 2F fumbled for a napkin packet. Overhead, lights flashed briefly as a flight attendant toggled the call button. Brenda Sullivan appeared in the aisle within seconds. She knelt beside Maya, her polished shoes making no sound. One hand hovered above Maya's shoulder as though uncertain whether to touch. "Oh my goodness, Maya," she said. Her voice wavered between concern and unease. "What happened? Are you all right?" Maya met her gaze, her eyes steady and clear. She brushed a sticky strand of hair from her face as though removing a trivial annoyance rather than a public violation. "It was not an accident," she said softly. "The gentlemen in 1D and 1F threw their drink on me." Brenda's expression flickered. She glanced at Grant, who was still guffawing, and then back at Maya. She opened her mouth and then closed it. She looked at her own uniform as if searching for the right protocol. The cabin door hummed with tension. "I'm so sorry." "Maya," she said, "I can bring you some towels, and I have a change of uniform from the service kit." Maya raised a hand gently to stop her. She drew in a breath and exhaled slowly. Her voice was quiet but carried through the cabin. "This was an assault," she said. "I expect you to record it as such, and I want the full names of the 2 passengers, and your full name for the report." Brenda swallowed. Her practiced composure trembled. She nodded, her platinum hair catching the light. "Of course, Maya," she said. "I will note it immediately." She stepped back and retrieved a small notebook from her apron pocket. She wrote rapidly. The click of her pen sounded loud. Tyler and Grant watched with predatory curiosity, their smirks intact. Grant straightened and held out a hand to his friend in mock solemnity. "I apologize, Maya," he slurred. His words were thick with amusement. "I am very, very sorry." His apology was empty. Maya felt the cabin tilt beneath her as though the plane had shifted again. The boundaries of safety had dissolved. She inhaled, focusing on the rhythm of her breath. Inhale, compassion. Exhale, resolve. She turned off her tablet's power to save the battery and slid it under her seat. She would need it later. Passengers in nearby rows craned their necks, curious about the drama unfolding. A hush settled. It was as though the entire cabin was holding its breath. Maya pressed her lips together and returned her gaze to Brenda. "Please record the incident in full detail," she said, "and I want a copy of the report when we land." Brenda hesitated, then nodded. She closed her notebook with a soft snap and slipped it back into her pocket. She stood and gave Maya a small, uncertain nod. Then she moved down the aisle toward the cockpit door, intent on her duty but visibly shaken. Maya stayed seated. She allowed herself a moment to steady her pulse. The cold soda on her neck had begun to fade in her awareness. What remained was the weight of indignity and the fuel of justice. She braced her hands on the armrests and flexed her fingers. The cabin lights cast long shadows across the carpet, marking the boundaries of her space. She thought of her niece, waiting for her in Los Angeles. She recalled her smile, the ways that child saw the world without cynicism. That image grounded her. She would not let someone else's cruelty define her story. A flight attendant approached with a stack of cocktail napkins. They were little more than tissue-thin squares that dissolved under any pressure. Maya accepted them and dabbed at the damp fabric of her blouse with careful precision. Each press of a napkin lifted a droplet of Coke. She folded the napkins and placed them on the side table. Another attendant arrived with a fresh glass of water. She held it with gloved hands as though presenting a gift. Maya took the glass and sipped. She wiped the corner of her mouth with her napkin. The relief of the water was a reminder that comfort could still be found even after some ordeal. The plane cruised through clear air once more. The engines settled back into their familiar hum. Yet something had shifted. First class no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a stage for power dynamics and moral choices. Maya closed her journal. She flipped to a new page and wrote down a single word: justice. She paused and added nuance: restorative. She underlined both terms. Then she looked at the cabin around her. She saw faces turned away, oblivious or unwilling to intervene. She saw the two men in their pods untouched by shame. She saw Brenda's trembling confidence as she fulfilled her duty. She took a deep breath and allowed herself a small nod as if making a promise to herself. This was not the end of the story. It was a turning point. A single act could set off a chain reaction that reached far beyond the cabin walls. Maya Carter would ensure that the next chapters honored both truth and mercy. Maya Carter sat upright, the stiff flush of indignation intensifying like a slow burn. The cabin lights above glowed softly, but to her they seemed harsher now, as if spotlighting her every move. Her cashmere top was still damp beneath her collarbone, and the faint stickiness lingered on her skin. She folded her hands in her lap and flicked her gaze toward the aisle. The seats felt narrower than before. The distance between her and Grant Weiss and Tyler Monroe felt impossibly wide and impossibly small. All at once, a chasm of disrespect bridged only by the thin carpeted floor. Brenda Sullivan had retreated to the galley with her notebook clutched to her chest. Maya could hear the soft shuffle of pages turning as she consulted protocol. She pictured Brenda ticking boxes in a manual passenger complaint assault investigation report. The thought brought a measure of reassurance. Protocol existed to protect victims. Yet the ritual of writing alone would not erase the stain of cruelty or restore the dignity that had been stolen. Maya closed her eyes for a moment and inhaled through her nose. Drawing in a breath of recycled cabin air, as deliberately as she inhaled oxygen before critical surgery. She imagined her lungs expanding like bellows, then exhaled all doubt. Within her, empathy and determination intertwined. She felt the weight of being a symbol, the only black woman in first class, the accomplished doctor, the one who had refused to remain silent. She had insisted on being seen. Now she would insist on justice. She opened her eyes and caught the attention of a flight attendant passing by with a tray of sparkling water glasses. She raised her hand gently. The attendant paused, setting the tray on a side counter and smoothing her uniform blouse. "Excuse me." The attendant turned and met Maya's steady gaze. "Yes, Dr. Carter." Maya's voice was calm but firm. "I would like to review the report once it is complete and receive copies. I would also like the names of both passengers who assaulted me and your full name and employee number for the record." She paused to let the words land, and finally, "I would like assurance that this incident is documented as an act of assault and discrimination." The attendant's face flickered between concern and a sense of bureaucratic caution. She swallowed and nodded. "Of course, Dr. Carter." She said, "I will ensure the report includes all details and that copies are delivered to you after landing. Your request is clear." Maya inclined her head appreciatively. "Thank you." She pressed her lips together, then added, "I expect the captain to be informed as well. I want this elevated to the highest level upon arrival." The attendant gave a slight bow and left to relay the message down the aisle. Maya watched her go, then exhaled slowly. Her shoulders relaxed fractionally. She returned her gaze to her journal on the tray table. She opened it and wrote a phrase in neat script, "Official records matter." Beneath it, she drew a small line and wrote, "Elevate all levels." She underlined both lines. Words had power when placed on paper. She set the journal aside and surveyed the cabin. Tyler Monroe lounged in 1D. He watched her with amused curiosity and a hint of irritation. He fiddled with his smartwatch as though it were a toy meant to distract him from discomfort. Grant Weiss sat beside him, his smug grin slowly fading in the face of protocol. Neither man made eye contact with Maya, but the tension in their posture made their awareness undeniable. A hush settled again. Passengers leaned forward, craning to see what would happen next. Cameras and phones remained sheathed. The code of first class was clear intervene only when absolutely necessary. But documentation was happening, and that alone was a form of intervention. Maya inhaled again. She acknowledged that restraint was not capitulation. It was a strategic choice informed by respect for systems and accountability. She had chosen to assert her rights through procedure rather than spectacle. A flight attendant emerged from the galley carrying a tablet computer. She approached Maya and tapped the screen. The attendant's voice was professional but sympathetic. "Dr. Carter," she said, "the report has been created and submitted to the cockpit. It includes the time of the incident, the names you provided, and notes on discrimination language used by the passengers. I have added my name, Brenda Sullivan, employee number 45782, and I will send you a copy via your email address upon landing." Maya watched the attendant's fingers glide over the screen. She nodded. "Thank you, Brenda," she said. Her voice softened slightly as she added, "Please extend my thanks to the rest of the crew for handling this professionally." Brenda met her gaze for a moment and gave a curt nod. "I will, Doctor Carter." Then she turned and walked back toward the galley, her shoes clicking on the aisle floor. Maya returned to her seat and opened her laptop computer. She connected to the in-flight Wi-Fi and typed a brief note to herself in an email draft. Subject line, incident report, follow up. She wrote, please confirm receipt of report and provide ETA on delivery of copies. She paused, then added note to self-evaluate next steps based on response time and content. Then she saved the draft and minimized the window. She folded her hands in her lap again and closed her eyes for a moment. The ritual of documentation provided structure after chaos. It reminded her of charting in the hospital every entry. Every signature, every timestamp mattered. Memories of hospital corridors flashed briefly, the sound of overhead lights in sterile hallways, the murmur of anxious families in waiting rooms, the precision of monitoring equipment ticking away vital signs. In those moments she had been vigilant, unwavering. Here she was no different. A flight attendant distributed snack baskets, a selection of nuts, dried fruit, and gourmet chocolates. Maya accepted hers, but left it untouched on the tray table. The cabin returned to its routine rhythm. Conversation resumed softly, but the undercurrent of scrutiny remained. She met the eyes of a middle-aged businessman across the aisle. He offered a small nod of understanding, conveying an unspoken solidarity. She returned the nod and managed a faint smile. She returned to her journal and wrote 2 more words, collaboration and empathy. She underlined them and connected them with a line to official records matter. Collaboration with crew and empathy for all involved. It was a blueprint for restoring civility to a confined space. A reminder that even in halls of power and privilege the same rules applied. The plane might be owned by a corporation, but the cabin belonged to every passenger and crew member alike. She glanced at the rows behind her. Passengers shifted, stretching legs, adjusting pillows. The flight had settled into a steady cruise. The clouds outside the window were a sea of white, undulating in waves of cotton. The sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in indigo. Cabin lights softened into a warm glow. The world outside was vast and unknowable. The world inside was confined by walls and ceilings, yet those boundaries could not contain humanity. Maya pressed her hand to the wood veneer beside her armrest and closed her eyes. She felt both the weight of her request and the lift of her resolve. Seeking accountability was not an act of vengeance. It was an affirmation of dignity her own, and that of every person in that cabin. It was ensuring that power imbalances could be checked by procedure. It was reminding even the privileged that they were not beyond consequences. She leaned back into her seat and allowed the gentle hum of the engines to wash over her. The incident was documented. Names were recorded. Protocol had been invoked. The next phase would unfold with the arrival of someone who wielded tremendous influence, James Carter. But Maya's work would shape how that power was applied. She would stand as the guardrail between his fury and potential collateral harm. She opened her eyes as the cabin lights dimmed further for the evening. A flight attendant passed with blankets for the night. Maya accepted one and draped it over her shoulders like a shield. She returned to her journal, jotting a final line for this section of the flight: accountability through procedure equals respect. She closed the journal and set it aside. Her phone buzzed lightly with the confirmation that the report had been logged in the airline system. Maya smiled to herself. The storm had not yet passed, but she had staked her claim on integrity. The invisible line had been drawn clearly. Her sanctuary felt stronger now, fortified not by silence but by action. The cabin no longer felt like a battleground, but a place where ethics could prevail. She leaned her head against the seat and closed her eyes. Tomorrow, she would deplane in Los Angeles. But in that suspended space, she had reclaimed her dignity. And dignity was a currency that could never be spilled by anyone's glass. Maya Carter felt an electric charge run through her fingertips as she retrieved her phone from the pocket of her journal bag. The cabin lights had dimmed for the evening, giving the first-class cabin a soft, cocooned glow. Yet beneath the warm ambiance, her pulse still thrummed with the aftershocks of the assault. Protocol had been invoked and her dignity partially restored by documentation. But the stakes remained high. She needed to ensure that the next steps were guided by precision and care. She tapped the phone screen to activate the secure messaging app she only used for matters of utmost importance. Each time she opened that app, her heart rate spiked with anticipation. She typed carefully, each word chosen for clarity. James, I need you at gate 42B JFK flight 817 just now. Claire is fine but shaken. It was deliberate, not an accident. I have documentation the captain and Port Authority need names and statements. Please come now. She paused, reading the message. The words felt both heavy and necessary. Pressing send. She watched the tiny arrow slide the message into orbit. She turned the phone screen away so only she could see it, then slipped the device into the inner pocket of her jacket. The action felt like passing a baton in a relay race. Her role was to set the stage, to create order through procedure. His role would be to bring the power to enforce it. Minutes passed in a charged hush. Passengers settled into personal space, half asleep, half aware of the tension lingering in the air. The engine's hum was a lullaby that could not quiet her mind. She closed her eyes for a moment and visualized the scene on the ground, two black SUVs rolling onto the tarmac, tinted windows reflecting floodlights. Port Authority officers standing at attention like silent sentinels, and at the head of that convoy, James Carter, impeccably tailored, stride purposeful, eyes honed for injustice. A soft chime from her phone broke her reverie. She retrieved the device again. 2 words appeared on the screen. M on way. She allowed herself a small smile. His speed would be unparalleled. She trusted him to arrive before the plane even touched down, but speed without guidance could wreak havoc. She needed to channel that power with intention. A flight attendant approached carrying a small pillow and a menu for dinner service. The tray was laden with delicate dishes that gleamed in the dim light. Maya accepted the pillow and placed it behind her back, leaning into its soft support. She glanced at the menu and nodded at the attendant. "Thank you," she offered a brief smile. "Appreciate it." The attendant returned the smile and moved on. Maya ran a fingertip along the menu's edge, then set it aside. Despite her hunger, she had no appetite. Her focus was already on what would take place once the plane landed. She reviewed the list of priorities in her head. Ensure the 2 men are questioned by Port Authority. Obtain written statements from them. Verify the crew's welfare. Secure an apology from the captain. And finally, create a framework for restorative action that protects all involved. She tapped her pen against the journal's blank page before opening it. She wrote James Carter Arrival Logistics underlined beneath it. She sketched a rough diagram of the cabin door, the jet bridge, and the expected positions of officers and vehicles. She added notes about the timeline from wheels touching ground to the arrival of SUVs. She needed to anticipate every second. The plane began its descent slowly, engines throttling and wing flaps extending. A gentle rumble coursed through the fuselage. Maya felt the shift in momentum like a physical nudge. She closed her journal but left it open enough that she could return to it at a moment's notice. Then she powered up her tablet, pulling up the digital copy of the incident report. She read Brenda Sullivan's notes with careful attention, precise timestamps, verbatim quotes of racist language, descriptions of the assault. Brenda's handwriting had imprinted the gravity of the moment in ink. Maya marked a few key lines in the document. She wanted to be ready to press these details in any debriefing. She scrolled down to the section where the captain had acknowledged receipt of the report. That part comforted her. The captain was now formally aware. His duty was clear ensure passenger safety and uphold airline policy. Now it was his responsibility to cooperate fully. The seatbelt sign pinged on and the captain's voice echoed over the PA system. Please return to your seats and fasten seatbelts for landing. The voice was low and steady but carried urgency. Maya clicked her seatbelt into place and closed her tablet. She settled the pillow behind her, adjusting it for comfort. The cabin shifted into landing mode. Flight attendants moved swiftly, securing service carts and instructing passengers. The air felt charged with anticipation. Maya took a deep breath and centered her thoughts. Inhale, clarity. Exhale, doubt. Inhale, resolve. Exhale, fear. She felt the familiar buoyancy of control returning. The situation was serious but contained. She had transformed her anger into strategy. Protocol was her ally. Now she would wait for the power he wielded to arrive and execute with the same precision she demanded. Through the window, she glimpsed the tarmac below. The lights of JFK flickered against the dark apron. The city beyond shimmered in the distance. She felt a surge of purpose. This was where deterrence met compassion. The line between justice and spectacle could blur. She intended to keep it sharp. The landing gear touched down with a gentle thud. The cabin lights brightened slightly. Tires screeched ever so briefly against the runway before the engine's reversed thrust. Maya pressed her palms to her knees and exhaled slowly. The plane taxied toward the gate, moving with measured purpose. She closed her eyes and envisioned the sequence unfolding on the ground. Gate 42B would be quiet, almost empty, since Flight 817 was late. That meant fewer bystanders and less chaos. A small advantage. Yet the crew might be uneasy, worried about repercussions. She wanted to show them respect for doing their duty under pressure. She would instruct James to thank Brenda and the officers for their cooperation. Even in a moment of conflict, she valued collaboration. The plane stopped and the seatbelt sign dinged off. Passengers began to stand and gather belongings. Maya remained seated. She unclipped her belt and folded the blanket she wore. She retrieved her phone and checked the messaging app. No new updates. On-way still glowed on the screen. She pocketed the device and rose from her seat. She drew in another steadying breath. The aisle was clear. The cabin crew formed a line at the galley. Brenda Sullivan met Maya's eyes and offered a small nod. Maya returned it with warmth and gratitude. She gestured toward the door. Captain Maya said in a calm voice, "I would appreciate if I could be the first to deplane. I need to meet someone who will be arriving here shortly." The captain, standing by the cockpit door, inclined his head. Respectfully, of course, he brushed past Brenda and stepped aside. Passengers filed past Maya in orderly fashion. Some offered sympathetic glances. Others avoided eye contact. Maya moved with purpose, her posture poised. The aluminum stairs awaited outside. She descended, each step echoing softly. The flood of cool night air on the tarmac refreshed her. She paused at the bottom and looked toward the terminal. Two black SUVs with tinted windows were just rounding the corner. Port Authority police officers stood by, faces unreadable. A pilot clipped off his lapel microphone and approached Maya. "Do you require assistance, ma'am?" He wore a crisp uniform and his expression was professional. Maya nodded. "Yes, thank you. Your cooperation is appreciated. I have an order for the two passengers and your crew. Please hold the cabin until we have statements from them and make sure no one exits until Port Authority completes questioning." The pilot swallowed but nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I will see to it immediately." Maya turned toward the SUVs, which had now parked near the nose of the aircraft. Doors opened and officers stepped out, badges glinting in the floodlights. The first offered a firm nod as she approached. "Good evening, ma'am. I'm Officer Daniels of Port Authority. We have a notice to take statements from the two passengers and verify the identities of the crew." Maya held out her phone to display the incident report notification airline report, number 6521397. "I have orders from the captain and recorded statements from the flight attendant. This is the copy in your system." She handed him her phone. Officer Daniels swiped the screen and read the details. His expression remained neutral. "Understood," he said. "We will proceed as ordered," Maya exhaled. In that moment, she realized how effectively she had transformed her initial outrage into structured power. The line between victim and advocate had been crossed. She had called upon an ally with immeasurable resources, but she had guided him with dignity and strategic foresight. She had shaped the force that was about to be unleashed. She turned her gaze to the sky. The reflection of runway lights shimmered behind her. She felt the weight of her choices and the promise of what would follow. The night air drifted around her like an exhale of consequence. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving a band of deepening twilight along the horizon line as Flight 8117 taxied toward Gate 42B. Passengers gathered belongings. Pockets of conversation flared up, then hushed as people realized the flight was not yet over. Maya Carter remained seated, her posture calm and deliberate, eyes fixed ahead on the cabin door that would soon open. She felt the residual rumble of impact beneath the fuselage and the hum of engines transition into idle. Everything in that moment felt charged with anticipation. Behind her, Brenda Sullivan stood at the galley doorway, flanked by two other flight attendants. Their faces were etched with tension. They wore their uniforms exactly as company policy dictated, yet their shoulders slumped under the weight of uncertainty. Maya offered Brenda a small nod of solidarity and respect. Brenda managed a tight smile in return, her professional composure regaining strength. The cabin door opened with a smooth mechanical hiss. A jet bridge extended and clamped into place at the aircraft's entrance. Outside, the glow of floodlights illuminated two sleek black SUVs parked parallel to the fuselage. Their tinted windows were opaque barriers separating those inside from what was about to happen outside. Port Authority officers in dark uniforms stood at attention beside the SUVs, reflecting lights off the polished brass of their badges. Maya rose from her seat as the seatbelt sign pinged off. She gathered her journal and phone from the table beside her and draped her blanket over her arm. The flight attendants moved aside to clear the aisle. The pilot stood near the cockpit door, his face a mask of professional concern. He glanced at Maya and offered a polite nod. "After you," he said quietly, "I will oversee the deplaning order." She inclined her head. "Thank you," and moved into the aisle. Her steps were measured. Each footfall on the carpet felt like a heartbeat echoing in slow motion. She passed rows of passengers whose eyes followed her with curiosity, sympathy, or avoidance. The two men, Tyler Monroe and Grant Weiss, remained stationary in their seats as if unwilling to deplane until forced to. Their designer jackets cast long shadows under the overhead lights. Maya approached the front where a Port Authority officer stood waiting. He stepped forward with a formal nod. "Good evening, ma'am. I am Officer Daniels. We will be taking statements from the two passengers in 1D and 1F, as well as verifying the crew's identities before anyone exits the aircraft." Maya handed him her phone, displaying the incident report notification. "Everything is documented here," she said, candor lacing her tone. "The captain has been informed, and these statements are authorized under federal regulations. Please proceed." Officer Daniels tapped the screen and reviewed the report. Once confirmed, he looked up. "Very well. We will handle this immediately." He stepped aside to allow two other officers to board. They moved quickly through the aisle toward the two men. Maya watched Tyler Monroe lift his hands in a feigned display of compliance while Grant Weiss scoffed and exchanged a nervous glance with his friend. The officers spoke quietly to them. Words were exchanged that Maya could not hear, but saw the men's expression shift from amusement to apprehension. Meanwhile, the rest of the cabin remained in a hush. No one moved toward the exit. Every passenger witnessed the unfolding bystander tableau. Some rushed to open overhead bins, thinking perhaps they would leave but not recognizing they were expected to wait. The flight attendants murmured among themselves, hands clasped in front as though bracing for an unwelcome storm. Maya took a moment to scan the crew. There was a young flight attendant named Claire who assisted Brenda with the snack cleanup. Claire's eyes were red as though she had been holding tears back. Maya offered her a gentle nod of encouragement. Claire managed a small smile before looking away toward the cockpit. The tension in her neck was visible as she held herself in rigid composure. A soft click echoed as the cockpit door opened. The captain stepped out flanked by the first officer. Both looked unsettled, glancing at the SUVs waiting just outside the jet bridge. The captain cleared his throat and addressed passengers with authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate your patience. We are conducting federal procedures required after an onboard incident. Please remain seated until we notify you." "Thank you for understanding." His words resonated through the cabin. The crew members inclined their heads in acknowledgement. The Port Authority officers completed their exchange with the two men and began escorting them down the aisle toward the exit door. Tyler Monroe's smug posture had faded to grim resignation. Grant Weiss's bravado was gone, replaced by a nervous shuffle. Maya observed the precision of the operation as officers guided the men through the seats, requiring them to stand and walk between rows. No one interfered. At the bottom of the jet bridge, the SUV's doors opened and officers led the two men through the corridor. They emerged wrapped in the glow of floodlights, faces reflected in mirrors of polished metal. Cameras flashed briefly from a distance as a lone reporter snapped photos. Maya recognized the emblem on the camera strap as belonging to a major news agency. The moment was already seeping into public record. Back on the plane, the aisle cleared. Maya watched the last officer return and close the exit door. The jet bridge parted with a hiss and retracted. Maya turned her attention to the crew assembled at the galley. She stepped forward and addressed Brenda Sullivan. "Officer Daniels," he said, his voice carrying, "that completes our preliminary questioning of passengers and verification of crew identities. Thank you for your cooperation." Brenda straightened and gave a curt nod. "Thank you, officer." She turned to Maya and offered her tablet with digital copies of statements. "The signed statements are here," she said. "All crew members have been accounted for and consented to provide information." Maya accepted the tablet and reviewed the files. Each statement was precise. Names, times, quotes, nothing was missing. She looked up at Brenda and the rest of the crew. "Thank you for your professionalism today," she said. Her tone was earnest. "Your willingness to fulfill your duty under difficult circumstances is appreciated." Brenda's shoulders relaxed fractionally, and she bowed her head slightly. "Thank you, Dr. Carter." Maya handed back the tablet and moved toward the aisle again. As she passed the seats where Tyler and Grant had sat, she paused. She knelt beside seat 1D and left her journal on the armrest, a small notebook with structured lines that held her thoughts, her demands, and now a record of what had transpired. She pressed the book gently as though planting a seed. Then she stood and continued toward the exit. Passengers watched as her figure receded, confident and composed. The jet bridge reattached to the terminal and the aircraft doors opened. Maya stepped onto the bridge and into a corridor of bright fluorescent lights. The hallway buzzed with activity, luggage carts rattling, ground crew shouting, the distant drone of airport announcements. At the end of the bridge, James Carter stood waiting. He wore a tailored navy suit that hugged his frame perfectly. His silver-streaked hair was immaculate. His eyes locked onto Maya's, the intensity palpable even from yards away. He closed the gap between them in 2 strides and knelt to adjust her jacket collar. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice, a low rumble, meant only for her. She nodded. "I am." He stood and extended his hand toward the crew and officers. "I intend to thank each of you personally for your cooperation today." He turned to the officers, who saluted respectfully. "We appreciate your presence," he said. Then he added to Maya, "Let's go home." She offered him her hand and stepped past the officers into the open expanse of the tarmac. The SUV's engines idled behind them. Lights from the terminal reflected off wet pavement. Maya placed her hand in his and exhaled. The immediate storm had passed, but a larger tempest was forming. She knew the media, the public discourse, and the fallout at the Foundation would challenge them. Yet, for now, she allowed herself the steadiness of his grip and the promise of the structured justice that had been set into motion. The SUV's doors thumped shut behind Maya and James Carter as they slipped into the back seat. The plush leather enveloped them, a stark contrast to the hard metal of the jet bridge and tarmac. Outside, the ground crew bustled around the idle airplane, their faces masked by routine. The hum of the city beyond JFK began to fill the silence inside the vehicle as it pulled away. Maya sank deeper into the seat, her thoughts racing. She looked over at James, whose jaw remained clenched in the aftermath of what he had unleashed. His hand found hers and squeezed gently. She closed her eyes and exhaled. They had executed the mid-air coup flawlessly. But now the human cost loomed large. News alerts pinged on her phone as soon as the vehicle's driver turned on the car's Wi-Fi. Headlines blared phrases like "Billionaire CEO fires entire crew after wife's assault" and "Justice served at 30,000 feet." The first wave of public reaction was a tidal wave of praise. Thumbs-up emojis poured onto social media feeds. Short video clips showed the 2 men being escorted off the plane. Their faces blurred, but their shame unmistakable. But beneath the surface of the initial celebration lay a different story. Maya tapped through the links, her heart tightening with each scroll. A freelance journalist, Olivia Grant, had posted an in-depth look at the fired crew. Brenda Sullivan was featured prominently, a woman with 28 years of service, a single mother whose son suffered from cystic fibrosis and depended on her health benefits. The report included photos of Brenda in her modest Queens apartment, her face lined with exhaustion as she cradled her sleeping child. Maya's breath caught. The realization hit her like a second impact. Brenda's livelihood, her family's security, had been collateral damage in a battle that Maya had helped initiate. The nurse and co-pilot, too, had stories. One had a daughter in college relying on his tuition stipend. Another had a mother battling cancer, cared for on a nurse's salary. They were ordinary people with ordinary struggles. They were not the villains. James's grip tightened around her hand as he read over her shoulder. His dark eyes flicked to the screen. His expression shifted from triumph to disbelief. He had wanted swift justice for his wife's humiliation. He had not intended to upend lives beyond the immediate perpetrators. He closed his eyes and rubbed his temples. Maya cleared her throat. His seat belt clicked as he leaned forward. She tapped on Olivia Grant's article and scrolled to the end, where user comments debated the ethics of summary dismissal. Some defended the crew's firing as necessary deterrence. Others condemned it as corporate cruelty. The debate had split into passionate camps overnight. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I didn't realize how many lives would be affected." James exhaled. He turned toward her in the dim cabin light. His suit jacket stretched across the seat as he shifted. "I saw the headlines and I was proud. I thought we struck at the root of injustice." But he paused and swallowed. And now he didn't finish the sentence. Instead, he stared out the window at the city lights, their streaks blurring past like a watercolor painting in motion. He'd always operated on precision data, metrics, outcomes. Emotions were variables to optimize. Yet this scenario had spiraled beyond any model he had run. Maya reached across and placed her other hand on top of his. He looked at her, the tension in his features raw. "What do we do now?" She thought for a moment, reviewing her mental blueprint for restorative justice. Restore benefits to the crew, offer counseling, create a fund, ensure their names and reputations were cleared. She tapped out a quick note in her journal app, Collateral Damage Mitigation Plan. "We need to support Brenda and the crew," she said softly. "We need to ensure they have everything they lost because of our actions." James nodded slowly. "Yes," he said, his voice was thick with regret. "I will arrange an independent fund to cover their lost wages, medical bills, everything." Maya squeezed his hand. "Precisely." She leaned back as the car merged onto the expressway. The glow of the runway lights faded behind them and the city opened up before them like a map of possibilities. She opened her laptop and connected to her secure server. She drafted an outline for a proposal, a multi-million-dollar restorative fund, administered by a third-party nonprofit, with clear criteria for eligibility and a simple application process. No red tape, no judgment, just tangible help for those whose lives had been disrupted. She looked at James and added, "We need to contact Brenda personally. She needs to know we see her story. We're not just reacting to headlines, we're owning this." James pressed his lips together and nodded. "Yes." He pulled out his phone and dialed his assistant's number. He spoke briskly, his words precise. "Activate the Carter Initiative callback team. Notify legal and PR, but hold any statements until we have our plan in place." He glanced at Maya once more. "Affirmative." He ended the call and turned to her. "Apologies are not enough. he said. "We need action and transparency." Maya smiled, relief mingling with pride in her chest. "That's the plan," she said. "That's real justice." They rode in that moment of quiet resolve as the car navigated through airport roads toward the exit onto the highway. Maya watched the city's glimmering arteries unfurl before her. Each exit sign and lane change was a decision point. They were moving forward from reaction into responsibility. The driver turned off the expressway and peeled into a private entrance at the back of a sleek black building. Maya recognized it as Blakeet Holdings' off-site command center, James's discreet operations hub. They stepped out, the night air crisp and cool. Security greeted them by name and ushered them inside. Maya and James entered a conference room bathed in soft light. A long table stood beneath a video wall displaying live feeds, news channels, social media trends, internal memos. Olivia Grant's article was pinned on one screen with user comments scrolling below it. Financial tickers ran across another. A whiteboard held Maya's handwritten proposal steps along with bullet points detailing crew profiles. James dropped his car keys into a bowl by the door and turned to face the room. He cleared his throat. "Everyone," he said, "we have a situation. The immediate crisis on Flight 8117 has been contained, but we now face collateral damage. This presentation outlines our plan to support the crew affected by our actions." He gestured, and the wall shifted to a slide titled Restorative Justice Fund Objectives. Maya stepped forward and clicked the next slide. Profiles of affected crew members with photos and brief bios. Brenda Sullivan, age 58, single mother with cystic fibrosis. Son, Claren Nguyen, age 29, co-pilot, Air Force veteran, tutoring 2 children. James paused for effect and looked around the room. "This pillar of our initiative," he said, "compassion, funds for lost wages, medical support, counseling services. Title each with bullet points and projected budgets." The team sat up straighter, their expressions a mix of relief and admiration. "This is something we can do," they said, "and do well." Maya added, "And will handle applications swiftly. No bureaucracy. We'll partner with a respected nonprofit to administer it impartially." A PR lad spoke up. "We should prepare a statement explaining our actions and the fund. This will help shift the narrative before it spirals further." James nodded. "Let's draft that." Concurrently, Maya's eyes met his in silent agreement. They would own the story now, not as tyrants but as accountable leaders committed to true justice. The next morning, Maya Carter awoke to a barrage of notifications on her phone. Her eyelids fluttered open to the soft glow of early sunlight filtering through the blackout shades in their penthouse. She pressed her palm to her forehead and sat up. The room was quiet except for the gentle hum of the air conditioner. James Carter was already gone. She could tell by the empty side of the bed and the faint scent of his cologne lingering in the air. She grabbed her phone and tapped the notifications one by one. Carter Justice trended at the top of Twitter, followed by a CEO hero and "She deserved it." Beneath the praise and admiration lay a second wave of commentary, corporate cruelty, Black Lives Matter, and collateral damage. Clips of the mid-air eviction had gone viral. Speed paint animations, meme overlays, and reaction videos flooded every social media platform. News outlets had splashed the breaking story across their homepages. Billionaire air fires entire crew after wife's humiliation. Power couple delivers instant justice. Flight 8117 scandal splits public opinion. She opened the New York Times app and saw the lead article written by investigative reporter Olivia Grant. The headline read, "The Aftermath of Instant Justice." How a mid-air coup became a social media firestorm. Maya scrolled through the piece. Olivia had captured both sides of the narrative with sharp clarity. She had detailed the initial assault, the swift takeover, and then turned her lens on the crew's fallout. Brenda Sullivan's story was featured prominently with quotes from her union representative. The article ended with a poignant question. Where does justice end and corporate accountability begin? Maya exhaled and closed her eyes. The story had escaped their control the moment cameras caught the SUVs charging onto the tarmac. The public conversation had shifted from righteous indignation to ethical debate overnight. The stage had expanded from a confined cabin to a global arena of opinion. She rose and walked to the living room window overlooking Central Park. The city stretched out below the grid of streets, the river of cars, the persistent pulse of urban life. Somewhere out there were news crews, celebrity commentators, and digital influencers hashing out every detail of Flight 819. She thought about the passengers who had witnessed the ordeal, their voices already woven into the tapestry of online discourse. Every passenger had become an unwitting contributor to the hashtag war. Her phone buzzed again. A headline from a business news site blared, "Carter Holdings stock dips as ethical backlash mounts." The ticker showed a modest decline, but the symbolic weight was heavier than the points lost. Even financial analysts were weighing in on the morality of his actions. Maya tapped the notification and read a summary of investor concerns about reputational risk. Many articles questioned whether James's response had crossed the line from defensive spouse to tyrannical overreach. She sank onto the edge of the couch and opened a text from James. "Good morning. My apologies for the early headlines. I'm convening the board at 10 a.m. We need to present our restorative plan before the markets open. You have my full support. Love, J. Maya," typed back, "Thank you. I am reviewing Olivia's article now." We need to respond thoughtfully. She set the phone down and reached for her journal. She wrote hashtags as barometer and underlined it. The hashtags were more than digital slogans. They signaled the mood of public sentiment. Dynamic, volatile, unfiltered. She wrote media narrative is fluid and paused. She needed to map out a response that acknowledged the complexity of the moment. She tapped her laptop and opened her secure email. The draft statement sat in her outbox. She reread it aloud. "My husband and I deeply regret the pain caused to the crew of Flight 817. We acted out of love and the desire to protect, but we recognize now that our actions had unintended consequences. Our priority is to support those affected through the new Carter Restorative Justice Fund." She adjusted the phrasing mentally and deleted a sentence that sounded defensive. She replaced it with, "We affirm the dignity of every individual aboard and commit to listening and learning before making final judgments." A knock at the door signaled James's departure. He entered briskly, holding his tablet. His suit jacket hung on a nearby chair. He looked tired but focused. She closed her laptop and stood. "Let's review," he said. "We need to be aligned before 10 a.m. She nodded. "Let's do it." They sat side by side on the couch. James swiped through his slides for the board presentation. Charts of fund allocations, eligibility criteria, and timelines. She pointed to a line item for immediate community support grants. "We need to emphasize speed," he said. "The initial headlines will be forgotten if we can show action within the next 24 hours. She agreed. "Yes, we should use our platforms to announce a listening session for crew members. This will demonstrate transparency and invite dialogue." James tapped the tablet and added that to the agenda. He leaned back and exhaled. "The hardest part," he said, "is admitting we were wrong, and doing more than just saying it." She placed her hand on his wrist. "Words alone are not enough. Actions will speak louder." He looked at her with gratitude. "Thank you for grounding me." They spent the next hour refining the language of their announcement. Maya insisted on including an apology directly to Brenda and her son, naming him and acknowledging his medical needs. She also insisted on a commitment to matching funds for any charitable endeavors he had previously promised to the Carter Foundation. At 10 a.m., they entered the boardroom of Blakeet Holdings, where board members gathered around a polished mahogany table. The screens displayed the social media feed with hashtag counters ticking upward. The air was crisp with anticipation, the glare of corporate power meeting the glare of public scrutiny. James began. "Our social media landscape is a reflection of collective conscience." He looked to Maya. "You have led our narrative shift." She nodded and addressed the room. "We recognize the power imbalance in our initial actions and the collateral damage inflicted on dedicated employees. We propose not only the Restorative Justice Fund, but an independent oversight committee to ensure accountability and prevent future misuse of power." Board members nodded. Slowly, they began to see the value of empathy as a hedge against reputational risk. Olivia Grant's article had influenced even their stoic expressions. One senior director cleared his throat and said, "We support this approach, but we must also manage investor expectations and regulatory compliance." James responded, "We will release our statement within the hour and set up a dedicated hotline for crew support. We aim to restore trust through decisive action and open communication." As they left the boardroom, Maya felt a cautious optimism. She sent a tweet from her personal account. "Justice must be precise, not punitive." She paused, then clicked post. Within seconds, hearts and retweets appeared. Quiet, justice began trending alongside Carter Restorative Fund. She looked at James and smiled. The hashtags had shifted. Carter Restorative Fund was now the beacon. Public memory was fickle, but action endured. They had turned the tide from spectacle to substance. Standing side by side, they exited into the corridor and into the uncertain light of a new digital dawn. The conversation was far from over, but the narrative had taken a turn toward accountability and compassion. In that moment, they felt the weight of social media's power and the responsibility that came with it. Maya Carter paced their penthouse library. Her footsteps light on the plush carpet. The walls were lined with books on medicine, ethics, philosophy, and leadership. This room had witnessed countless late-night discussions and strategic decisions. Tonight, it would host the most important conversation of her life. James Carter stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out at the city lights. His reflection merged with the skyline as though he existed between two worlds of power and vulnerability. The door closed behind Maya with a soft click. The hush that filled the room felt heavy with unsaid truths. She moved to the mahogany desk where 2 glasses of water waited. She lifted one and offered it to James. He accepted it and took a slow sip before setting it down on the desk. Maya's pulse thrummed with the gravity of what they had unleashed and what still lay ahead. She began with a gentle tone, "James, I can see how deeply you care for me. I know your actions came from love, but we need to talk about the consequences." His shoulders stiffened as he turned from the window to face her. His jaw tightened for a moment before he nodded. "I know," she said. "I've been reading the articles and the comments. We have to acknowledge the pain inflicted on those we never intended to harm. James ran a hand through his hair, the silver streaks catching the lamplight. Yes, he said, I protected you. I protected your dignity. But in doing so, I wielded my influence like a hammer, and I didn't consider the lives that would shatter under the force. The silence that followed carried the weight of accountability. Maya inhaled and met his gaze. We need precision, not spectacle, she said. Her voice was firm yet compassionate. Our strength lies in measured action, guided by empathy, not by the thrill of public vindication. She stepped closer and placed a hand on his chest near his heart. I saw you at 30,000 feet. I saw the fierceness in your eyes, and I felt safe, but I also saw lives undone by that moment of rage. James closed his eyes and let out a low breath. You see them now, she added softly. The crew members whose stories became collateral damage, they are not just faces in a news cycle. They are people with families, dreams, and struggles that matter as much as ours. We owe them more than a headline apology. He nodded and reached for a leather-bound notebook on the desk, flipping it open. Maya recognized her own notes, mapped out with bullet points and timelines. He scanned the pages, then looked back at her. You're right, he said. My first instinct was to make you whole again. I lost sight of the humanity in front of me. I turned the world upside down, without pause for reflection. The reflection you bring is what we need. Maya felt a mix of relief and sorrow. She knelt beside him, placing her hand on the notebook. I wrote key principles. She said, empathy, precision, restraint, accountability, and restorative justice. Each principle guides our next steps. They must shape how we engage with those we hurt. James lifted her hand and pressed it to his lips. Thank you, he said. I have been a strategist all my life, but I forgot the value of listening and learning from the people impacted by my decisions. He set the notebook down and stood his full height. Their eyes met in a moment of shared purpose. He spoke again. Let us begin with Brenda Sullivan and her son. My actions affected her life deeply. I will meet with her and offer a personal apology, then implement the fund for her medical bills. Maya nodded. She had anticipated this. He continued, and we will create a platform for every crew member affected to share their experiences privately. If they choose, we will listen and adapt our support accordingly. She smiled at his words. That is the essence of restorative action, she said, honoring their dignity rather than overshadowing it with spectacle. He offered his arm and led her to the large armchair by the fireplace. They sat side by side in the warm glow of the hearth flames, dancing softly. The conversation shifted to the Carter Foundation Gala scheduled for next month. Maya had been co-chairing the event to raise funds for pediatric heart research. She outlined the challenges ahead of us. We need to recalibrate the gala's message to include acknowledgement of the lessons learned from this incident. We should dedicate a portion of the proceeds to support healthcare workers in underrepresented communities. She paused to let the idea settle in. James considered the proposal deeply. Then he nodded. I like that, he said. It will show that our commitment to social good goes beyond headlines. It will reflect genuine accountability and ambition to make systemic change. They drafted bullet points for a revised invitation letter, emphasizing inclusion, transparency, and community partnership. As the night deepened, they covered every angle, including communications, legal logistics, and personal outreach. Maya paused and looked at him. Do you ever wonder, she asked softly, what if we lose everything? If our reputation crumbles, our influence evaporates. Who would we be then? James stared into the fire for a moment. Then he turned to her and smiled with vulnerability. You and I would still be Maya Carter and James Carter, two people who care deeply about others. He reached across the chair and took her hand in both of his. We would rebuild with humility and purpose. That is who we are. Her eyes glistened with emotion. In that moment, the turmoil of the past days felt like a crucible forging something stronger between them. She leaned her head on his shoulder and whispered, "Thank you for listening. Thank you for choosing empathy over ego." He drew her close and kissed her forehead. The conversation had not ended, but the moral reckoning had begun. They had named their mistakes, embraced the pain of others, and laid the groundwork for true restorative justice. The path forward would be long and fraught with challenges, but together they would navigate with integrity and compassion. Maya looked up at him in the flickering firelight. "I believe we can transform this into lasting good," she said. "The spotlight may fade, but the work will endure." James nodded solemnly. "Yes, together," he said, "we will ensure that justice is not just a spectacle, but a lived practice." They sat in quiet reflection as the fire crackled and the city lights twinkled beyond. The windows, their moral compass, had reset, and their partnership had deepened. They were no longer just the powerful couple in the headlines, but advocates for real change bound by empathy and guided by accountability. Maya Carter and James Carter stood side by side in front of the sleek camera setup arranged in the polished boardroom of Blakeet Holdings. The soft glow of the studio lights cast a warm halo round them. A small team of production staff made final adjustments to cameras and microphones. The teleprompter blinked, waiting for their words. Outside the tall windows, the city hummed with the aftermath of the scandal. Today would be the day they reclaimed the narrative. James brushed a silver lock of hair from his forehead and placed his hand gently on Maya's back. She smiled at him for reassurance. Then she turned her attention to the teleprompter and inhaled deeply through her nose. The statement would be broadcast live on multiple networks and streamed around the world. Every word mattered. When the red tally light on the camera switched on, James began with measured steadiness. "My name is James Carter. I am the co-founder and chairman of Blakeet Holdings. Yesterday, my wife, Dr. Maya Carter, experienced an appalling act of humiliation aboard a commercial flight. In responding to that assault, I invoked my resources and authority to ensure accountability, but I now recognize that my actions went too far." He paused, allowing the weight of his admission to settle in the room. Maya watched him closely, her eyes empathetic. He continued, "I acted out of love and outrage but failed to consider the collateral damage inflicted on the dedicated crew members of Flight 8117. Their livelihoods and families were disrupted through no fault of their own. For that I am deeply sorry." He stepped back slightly and Maya moved forward. Her voice was calm, clear, and imbued with compassion. "I am Dr. Maya Carter. As a physician, I have dedicated my life to healing and to preserving the dignity of my patients. Yesterday, I witnessed how quickly dignity can be stripped away and how power can be misused. I stand here today not only to express my own hurt and outrage, but also to honor the humanity of every person involved in that flight." Her gaze swept the camera lens as though meeting each viewer personally. The teleprompter scrolled on. "Together, we are announcing the creation of the Carter Restorative Justice Fund. This $10 million fund will provide immediate compensation for lost wages, medical expenses, and support services to the airline crew members whose lives were upended. An independent nonprofit partner will administer grants through a simple and transparent application process. She allowed a moment for the announcement to resonate before continuing. We will also provide direct financial support to the family of Brenda Sullivan, the lead flight attendant. We understand that her son faces serious health challenges and relies on her insurance benefits. His medical care will be fully covered, and her own career security will be protected through a commitment to reinstate her pension and benefits. James nodded in gratitude. He then addressed the audience again. In addition, we will fund a series of sensitivity and de-escalation training programs for all Blakeet Holdings employees who interact with customers. We commit to a company culture that values respect, empathy, and accountability above all else. Maya stepped back in to add her final words. Justice is not a spectacle. True justice requires compassion with accountability. We pledge to listen, to learn, and to act with precision and care. We invite representatives of Flight 817's crew to meet with us directly, to share their experiences in confidence, and to help shape future initiatives. The teleprompter concluded. A transcript would be available online within minutes. Maya and James exchanged a brief glance of solidarity. Then they stepped away as the director signaled cut. The room filled with soft murmurs of relief and satisfaction from the production team. Within moments, Maya's phone buzzed with the first wave of responses. A tweet from Brenda Sullivan's union read, "Thank you for recognizing our humanity and for meaningful action." Heart emojis streamed in reaction. Clips of the live apology and fund announcement were already trending under Shan Quiet Justice and Chask Carter Restorative Fund. James allowed himself a small smile. He took Maya's hand and led her out of the studio to a quieter conference room overlooking the river. They sat side by side, their reflections dancing on the glass. They would need to follow through on every promise made, to maintain transparency in their actions. Maya opened her laptop and logged into the fund's newly established website. The application portal was live. Simple fields asked for basic information: name, role on flight, 817 dates of employment, summary of impact, no legal jargon, no complex paperwork. She clicked through to confirm the nonprofit partner's details and compliance certifications. James leaned over and reviewed the portal on her screen. Everything functioned smoothly. He exhaled. Their words had been spoken. Now their deeds would follow. Over the next 24 hours, the portal received dozens of applications. A member of the PR team read each submission aloud in the conference room. My job with the airline was more than a paycheck. It was our family's health insurance. My career and future have been in limbo, and my life has been too disrupted to find a new job. Each request carried the weight of genuine need. Maya listened, her heart aching with empathy. She drafted personalized apology letters addressed to each applicant. She included details acknowledging their service and promising swift review by the independent board. She signed each letter Dr. Maya Carter. James focused on outreach to Brenda Sullivan. He arranged a private meeting in Brenda's neighborhood Queens apartment. Security protocols were followed but minimized to avoid intimidation. He wanted to speak as a human being seeking forgiveness, not as a powerful CEO. Maya accompanied him. Brenda answered the door with a wary yet hopeful expression. She led them into a modest living room where a small table held a framed photo of her son receiving treatment. James knelt beside Brenda and offered a handwritten letter. Dear Brenda, I owe you a personal apology for the harm my actions caused you and your family. Your decades of service to countless passengers should have been honored, not revoked without due process. I understand now how much you risked to support your son's health care. Please accept this letter as a small token of my regret and my commitment to restore your security. With respect and humility, James Carter. Brenda's eyes filled with tears. She glanced at Maya, whose steady presence conveyed solidarity. Then she looked back at James. Thank you, she whispered. You have no idea what this means. He reached out and gently squeezed her hand. Then they discussed next steps in the fund application process. Brenda asked a few practical questions about timelines and who she could call if she had concerns. Maya provided her personal phone number. After the meeting, James and Maya returned to their penthouse. The evening sky glowed with city lights. They sat on the balcony, the cool breeze brushing their faces. We did what we promised, she said softly. Job, well done. James wrapped an arm around her shoulders. This is only the beginning, he said, but it is a meaningful beginning. They watched the skyline shimmer as our Carter Restorative Fund continued to trend. The storm had subsided, but the work remained. They had turned a moment of rage into a catalyst for real change. Justice had been delivered with compassion. Now they would carry that mission forward, one application at a time. Morning light filtered through the curtains of Maya Carter's penthouse suite, casting a gentle glow across the living room. The city outside was stirring to life. Cars hummed on the avenue below, and distant sirens faded into the steady pulse of urban morning. Maya and James Carter stood by the window, nursing cups of coffee. Their expressions were calm and reflective. They had navigated a tempest that had threatened both their personal world and the public sphere. Now they faced the aftermath with the resolve to honor their commitments and cultivate lasting change. Behind them on the coffee table lay Maya's open journal. The final pages documented the week's events in neat script: empathy, precision, restraint, accountability, restorative justice. The words felt like a mantra guiding every decision they had made. She glanced at James and offered a small smile. They had come a long way from the moment when a cup of soda shattered first-class decorum and unleashed a wave of power that neither of them fully anticipated. James set his cup down and turned to her. I have a meeting with the board at 9. He said they are ready for the first impact report on the Carter Restorative Justice Fund. I will present our early metrics and gather feedback on adjustments. We also need to finalize the plans for the listening session with Flight 817 crew members. Maya nodded. I reviewed the applications last night, she replied. 12 have been approved and funds disbursed. Some applicants have requested counseling support beyond financial aid. We should expand our offerings to include trauma-informed services and career transition resources. James raised an eyebrow. That is wise, he said. Trauma can linger longer than financial loss. We will integrate mental health services and job placement assistance into the fund's structure. Maya felt a surge of satisfaction. Their vision was now evolving beyond the initial framework into a robust ecosystem of support. She moved to the television console and tapped the remote. The news channel was running a segment on their initiative. It noted the fund's transparency, the swift response, and the new model for corporate restorative action. A television caption read, "Quiet Justice Rising Across Industries." Their public apology and reparations had become a case study in business schools and leadership seminars. Journalists had interviewed ethicists and sociologists on what it meant when someone of immense power recognized their own fallibility and acted to repair harm. Social media conversations had shifted again with the hashtag Quiet Justice Fund trending as a symbol of measured accountability. Maya leaned against the console and turned to James. "We have shifted the narrative," he said. "Our journey from outrage to action is offering a blueprint for others." James nodded. "Our goal was never to dominate headlines but to create impact," she replied. "The headlines are now a byproduct of tangible good." They fell into a comfortable silence, savoring the calm that followed the storm. In that moment, they embodied the transformation they had championed from the start. They had learned that true justice required humility and a willingness to listen. Maya picked up her journal and flipped to the last entry. She read the final sentence aloud. "Justice is a living practice. It thrives in the space between power and mercy." She closed the journal and placed it gently on the console. James reached for her hand and held it tenderly. "We will carry this forward," he said. "Together, we will ensure that our power is never used as a hammer again, but as a precision instrument guided by compassion." She smiled and rested her head on his shoulder. Then she pulled back and looked him in the eye. "You change the world step by step," she said, "not through spectacle but through sustained commitment." A soft ping came from Maya's phone. A notification from the fund's portal indicated a new application. She opened it and saw a name she recognized, an attendant from another flight who had commented on Flight 817's story, demanding better industry standards. He had lost his job for speaking out against discrimination. The application was heartfelt and thorough. She tapped approve with a sense of purpose. Each tap a reaffirmation of their values. James watched her. He knew that each approved application was more than a transaction. It was a restoration of dignity and a promise kept. Maya looked up. "Jane, okay," he said, "another life restored." Outside the window, a pigeon landed on the railing. It cocked its head as if observing the couple before taking flight into the morning sky. Maya watched it go and felt a sense of renewal. In nature, justice was not a singular event, but a cycle of harm and repair. She closed her eyes and breathed in the moment. In the weeks that followed, the Carter Restorative Justice Fund became a model for other corporations. Tech firms, energy companies, and even public institutions reached out for guidance on setting up similar programs. Maya and James traveled to conferences to share their experience, emphasizing 4 core pillars: empathy, precision, restraint, and accountability. Their keynote speeches resonated because they spoke from lived experience rather than theory. At a symposium on corporate ethics, Maya sat on a panel alongside union leaders, ethicists, and fellow CEOs. When a moderator asked her, "What is the most important lesson from the Flight 817 incident?" she paused and answered, "Justice without compassion is incomplete. Justice without accountability is reckless. True justice requires both the courage to act and the humility to listen to those we affect." The audience responded with a standing ovation. In that moment, Maya felt the culmination of the journey from humiliation to healing. She looked over at James, who sat in the front row watching proudly. Their partnership had deepened through adversity and transformed into a shared mission. That evening, they returned to their penthouse suite and sat at the dining table. A simple meal of roasted vegetables and grilled fish awaited them. They ate slowly, savoring the flavors and each other's company. Conversation drifted from work to personal dreams. Maya shared hopes for a research fellowship that supported minority physicians. James revealed plans for a scholarship fund tied to the foundation's work. They toasted with glasses of water held high to honor clarity and purpose. They had learned that power was most effective when tempered by empathy. They had discovered that healing required intentional action and ongoing commitment. Their story had started with a moment of cruelty and exploded into a public spectacle. They had chosen to let that spectacle drive them toward restorative change. As the night deepened, the city lights glittered below like constellations of possibility. Maya and James stepped onto the balcony and gazed at the skyline. They felt a quiet confidence, knowing that they had turned a personal trial into a force for good that extended far beyond themselves. Maya closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you." He wrapped his arm around her and replied, "Together, we will keep justice alive as our journey ends for now. Remember that real justice is not a single act of retribution, but a steadfast commitment to empathy and accountability." Maya and James Carter teach us that standing against racism means more than calling out the guilty. It means lifting up every person harmed along the way. Let their story inspire you to challenge discrimination wherever it hides and to demand that power be used to heal, not to harm. Thank you for watching. If you found this story moving, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring you more powerful tales that question, uplift, and drive change. We'll see you in the next video.